T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All three engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Greatness Movement podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Weiss. I'm a life coach, speaker, author, and founder of the Greatness Movement based here in Phoenix, where our goal is to guide you to be the greatest version of yourself. So, how do we do that? Well, if you're new to the Greatness Movement, we're here to do basically two things. The first one is give people the skills, tools, and knowledge. Let's face it. Not a single one of us, going back through all of human history for centuries, has ever been taught how to be a parent, how to have a relationship, or how to deal with our emotions. The three things that govern our success and happiness in life, we as a society have decided to never teach. That lack of information is what creates our pain personally and professionally. None of us are bad, but it keeps us from our greatness because we just haven't been taught, and we learn those three topics from people who weren't taught either. They're not to blame. They're not too bad. They're not bad. You can't blame somebody for something they don't know. So that's the first thing that we want to do at the Greatness Movement is break that. Let's give people the skills, tools, and knowledge. And number two, this one's deeper. This is the bigger one. We want to break down that inherent fear, judgment, and bias in society against looking at these topics, against talking about these things. And we want to help everyone live in their greatness by doing that. The whole point in breaking down that societal bias is we want to promote all of us to talk about and acknowledge the pain that we've all experienced. None of us avoid that. We want to now make it societally acceptable for all of us to become experts in overcoming our pain and imperfections. So that's the basic mission statement of the Greatness Movement. If you'd like to be a part of this growing effort and movement to change society and help people, all you have to do is go to the website, www.thegreatnessmovement.com. Right at the very bottom, you can subscribe to the website. That'll give you, you'll get an email. You put on the email list and be kept abreast of all the events, everything we're trying to do, the newsletter, everything that we do to help people. If you're not one of those people who likes to sign up for stuff, that's perfectly fine. Share this show. If you're watching on Facebook right now or you're on YouTube, you can always share and link it to friends that, if you want to spread, the ability for other people to learn and walk in their greatness. It doesn't matter to me how you do it. It just matters that it's something that matters to you and you want to be a part of it. So those are a couple of options for you. At any rate, let's get on with the show. So I watch this show, American Greed, all the time. I love it. I think it's amazing. It's basically about narcissistic sociopaths, right? The Bernie Madoffs of the world and how people con everybody. And I'm sitting there last week sometime watching, and I'm like, why haven't I ever done a show on this? Like, everybody gets conned, whether it's in a relationship or professionally. Like, it doesn't have to be the $1 billion con. We get conned, just by the homeless person sometimes. I mean, there's all those stories of people, driving BMWs, pretending they're living on the streets. They make their living standing at an overpass. And, then you see them at Fleming's that night eating dinner. So we've all been conned at some point. And, I watch that show. I'll get more at the back end of the show. I'll expose why I'm so drawn to that show, because there's a reason. As I've said before in previous podcasts, every single TV show that you're drawn to, every bit of music that you're drawn to, there's a reason for it. And at the end, I'll let you know what that reason is if you haven't heard it before, but it all ties in. Okay, so there's this great book out there by a lady named Maria Konnikova. She's a psychologist, and she wrote a whole book back in 2016 called The Confidence Game. And basically, she researched, con men or con women, con people, I guess is the politically correct term. And, on a broad spectrum of whether it was business, or personal. And one of the things there are several key things that popped out. And from my own experience of working with clients who've been conned, to me, there are 4 traits that repeatedly show up for someone who gets conned. One of the first ones is this is universal in everybody's life. We are all very good at being objective about others, but not about ourselves. What that means is because we teach no self-awareness, nobody knows who they are. Like it's kind of funny. There was somebody who a while back sent me a Facebook request, and underneath their picture, they talked about how real they were. Well, if you looked at their Facebook profile, they're anything but real. This person doesn't even know themselves. That's incredibly common because we teach absolutely nothing about self-awareness. That's why we're all great judgers, because we have a society that teaches us to judge. Remember, we've all learned by judgment. That's how we have relationships, everything. We've never been taught. So we learn by watching and making judgments. And so that's why we're great observers of people, but not great observers of ourselves. And so we don't recognize our own inherent weaknesses or biases or insufficiencies. We all live in massive denial of who we are. And we don't know it. Literally, we don't know it. I mean, that was something I had to learn, even now with what I do. Like, I know relationship wise, certain, deep interpersonal things, my radar is not very good. Like, I'm great with a client or somebody else, but I know enough to know that I'm not very good being objective about my own self. That's a horrifically difficult process. And again, none of us are taught at that. And it's something I've been working on for years, and I still see tremendous weaknesses. So imagine most of us aren't even aware that we don't know who we are and aren't objective. Well, you want to talk about susceptibility to being conned. That's quite often. That's just a general statement. That's not one of the main reasons. One of the main reasons is our inability to say no. She tells a story about this lady named Anita Barney. She was a former chairman at Wendy's, the hamburger place. And there's this guy, Art Schlichter. Sports fans will know him. I think he won the Heisman. The Heisman Trophy is the top college player. He's a great quarterback out of Ohio State, turned pro, had a massive gambling problem. He was a massive con man, just kept stealing. And she writes in her book, because I've seen the American Greed episode about these two, about the dynamic between Anita Barney and Art Schlichter. And in an interview with American Greed, she just said flat out, I couldn't say no. I just couldn't say no. That is the single most common quality, most prevalent quality in somebody who gets conned. Like, one of the great cons, I was at a barbecue last night, and we were talking about dating scams, or I can't remember how the topic got up, but it's really a multi-level marketing scam. That's what it was. So you go, here, give me your phone, and you punch in your phone number, and you fill in all the info and give it back. Most people are hesitant to say no. They're doing the sales presentation. They go, well, here, just give me your phone. I'll put the contact info in. And they literally take over your phone and set a meeting with you. And people will allow it to happen Now, there's a deep reason for that. I'm going to get to that and why that is. Some of it, the superficial reasons that most people think, these aren't the deep reasons, but some of the superficial reasons are the emotions that get involved, or we have a fear of missing out on a potential opportunity. The fear of regret can be really strong. That was something that Miss Barney pointed out. One of the big things for her, though, is she had lost her husband, and that's something that makes us very susceptible to being conned. Is any sort of major life event, whether it be a divorce or death, something like that, a transition, because it creates an emotional vulnerability in us. We're going through something deep and heavy, and so we already struggle with an awareness of ourselves. Now we're raw and open, and we're just looking for any sort of friendly support. So a great con person can turn on the charm, find that weak spot and fill that void for us, and allow us to use them basically as an emotional tampon, so to lighten the burden of some tremendous emotional disturbance that we're going through. It helps, remove some of the uncertainty to life, because what a con person really does is, as the author points out, is they sell you certainty. Like if it's, think of all the financial scams. I guarantee you're going to make 20%. Look at all these other people, or a man or a woman. I guarantee I'm going to love you. I'm going to be there. That's what they're selling is I'm gonna be there for you in whichever way you need the most. You get conned basically in an area that you need the most support. There's also this. There's a lot of research that shows it's not just when things are going bad. A lot of time it's positive changes. 2, you get the promotion. Things are going well in your life. They make you, because when things are going well, they make you kind of a bit grandiose and vulnerable to it, because you start becoming accustomed and kind of credulous of good things in general. So like someone like myself is incredibly susceptible to being conned. High achievers. I'm not saying that's me, but I mean, well, yeah, I mean, I have achieved a lot, so I guess you could say that's me. But people in my field is really what I meant to say of, I make a living at being able to read people, and the second they walk in the door, I know what their struggles are, and my gift is, how do I help them find the answer? Okay. So you would think, the natural thought is, well, no one could con me. I know people too well. Well, it's that exact grandiosity that works against someone like me and makes me very susceptible to being conned. I mean, I've been conned a lot in my life. Like, I'm gifted at reading people. I can tell life stories of people I've never met. I just have that ability. But I also know a great con person, they can spin me like a top. Now luckily I know that, but most people, this is why the Bernie Madoff was able to rip off so many people, because those people are so grandiose. They've achieved so much in life, and they're like, well, I'm impervious. I'm too smart. I'm too whatever it is. I've been to Harvard. I've done this. I've done that in my life, whether they're an accomplished athlete. Lots of athletes get scammed, musicians, movie stars, highly accomplished people are incredibly easy prey because they're so accomplished. They get grandiose. And luckily for me, I know one of my greatest weaknesses is how grandiose I can be. I just see the world sometimes too positively. And that's a real negative. I will have blind spots because I remember this is kind of a silly example, but it just popped into my head of I was playing hockey up in Canada. It's called something called junior hockey, highly competitive, and I was on this terrible team, and we were on a road trip to go, kind of make this several, had to play in several cities. And I remember us having a conversation about making the playoffs. And I was like, well, sure, we can we can do it. Well, we'd won like 8 games the whole year. But I just was like, well, why couldn't we? Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with thinking positive, but our team sucked. And because guys like him could never even dream of the possibility, I couldn't get into reality of, wait a minute, while I may believe it, I don't have enough guys in the room here that believe it. I couldn't accept that reality. That's where positive thinking works against you, because it keeps you from, negative assessment of seeing the truth of, while we may have a few players that are talented or a few players that have belief, most of them don't. That's why we've only won 8 games all year. And so you deny the reality, and that can be one of the problems with highly accomplished people. They will deny the red flags. They will deny the reality because they overinflate their abilities. All right. Now, so that's one of the main things is we can't say no. And I just kind of rattled off several ways that shows up. Another big key is most people get conned, or most people that pull off cons, it goes unreported. A lot of people that get conned, they don't want to acknowledge that they've been conned. Like the numbers are staggering of how often you have people who, even when presented with the evidence that they've been the victim of a scam, will absolutely refuse to believe it. Like they just won't. Like you can see, I mean, you've seen a lot of that with church groups. You see that a lot in politics, which, I mean, both political sides are, okay, let's take the presidential election. Trump and Clinton are both train wrecks. Yet Trump supporters can only see Hillary's problems, and Hillary supporters could only see Trump's problems. Like that's the perfect example of people who could get conned. They just refuse to report the truth. The other thing is, even if they do realize they've been scammed, they often don't want to let other people know because of their embarrassment. Now, there's a reason. I'm going to get to the deeper reason. See, this is where the book stops short. Like, okay, so you can't say no. Okay, this makes sense of why people wouldn't want to report. Denial. We don't want to admit this about ourselves, that we're imperfect. We don't want to admit that the other person is imperfect. We don't want to face our embarrassment. Okay, but there are deeper reasons for those. And that's the real answer that I'm going to get you, that the book doesn't get you. And that's the whole point of the greatness movement, is to get you that deeper answer that others won't give you. Here's another key to being conned. And this will be tough to hear. Whenever you're conned, in every situation, you are an active participant in your own conning. And this, she points out, it's scary how many times con artists don't ever even break the law. They don't steal. People willingly will hand over the money, give their hearts away. See, that's the whole, as she points out in the book, the whole premise of conning somebody, or as she calls it, the confidence game, is that they ask for your confidence and you willingly give it to them. You choose it. See, we con ourselves as much as they con us because we supply the missing links to their stories. We tell ourselves the story we want to hear because every con is a lie. So there's always a gap in the story. And at some point, we use, and it is a great analogy, we use whiteout. It just occurred to me. Like, think of it. The story's going along and there's a little blurb. And I've done this with girlfriends or wives or business associates. They say something with a red flag, and it's almost like I reach back and I grab whiteout and I just kind of brush over that. I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to ignore that. I don't want that to be true. And that makes us an active participant. Now, there's a major reason why for that. See, just telling you that doesn't give you the answer. It's like, okay, I get it, but why do I do that? What caused me to do all of these things? What caused me to not be able to say no? What caused me to not report things? What caused me to be a willing participant in all of this? Well, now we're going to get to the fourth reason. The fourth reason is basically inherent trust. There's a neuroscientist named Paul Zak, and he has a book called The Moral Molecule. And he studied what he calls the trust trap. And he says that we all suffer a hardwired, I'm going to read from it. We all suffer a hardwired disadvantage when it comes to identifying well-structured cons. The problem is that our brain wants to extend trust once it has been extended to us. Because part of it is our brains are guided by a hormone called oxytocin whenever we trust. Okay, so we get this on-off switch, and that we're usually able to determine whether or not trust is warranted in a given situation. Usually that system works well, but when someone is great at manipulating the system by outwardly mimicking trust, that will trigger, think of it like a Pez dispenser. You're going to get a shot of oxytocin in your brain, and that creates a chemical biological reaction that all of a sudden opens you up to trust. So what we're talking about here is false trust. We've learned, what Paul Zak doesn't say is our brain and bodies have been conditioned to accept false trust as basically a false positive. And he doesn't tell you why and where we learned that false trust. So let's get to the deeper truth, the truth this book doesn't touch and none of them touch. Basically, we can break it down to four things for people who get conned. One, people who can't say no. Two, people who won't speak up. They learned somewhere in life that they have no voice. Three, people learned to trust implicitly. They learned to deny the truth. They learned to accept basically a false reality. And finally, people who con themselves, they learned to orient truth into a fantasy of what they wanted. So what creates those four things? Well, there's only one thing that creates it, and it's childhood. It's parenting. Our parents taught us all that. Let's go through them. Now, first of all, before I do this, 80% of people say, no, childhood was great. Wonderful. Literally. I'm going to ask you one question. Actually, I'm going to ask you two questions. Because most people, this is how, much denial people are in society and don't know themselves, is they actually think their childhood was good. Nobody had a good childhood. It's impossible. We haven't been taught. Now, that doesn't mean your parents are bad. It's not what I'm saying. It's about using that negative thinking to get into reality. Okay? That's all I'm advocating here is this is the only way we change society is we have to get into truth. So let me ask you two questions. One, was there ever a time when you were angry, sad, or scared, especially about something your parents did or said. And in that moment, could you have an open discussion about it? Could you go to them and say, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm scared, what you're doing this moment is freaking me out? Or did you have to keep your mouth closed and not say anything? Every single person has had to keep their mouth closed. Never. Maybe you argued over them when you got older, but they never invited you, did they? If they did, you probably count on less than one hand. That's abuse. That's a lack of attunement. That's why you can get conned right there. Think of it. In that moment, you couldn't say no. You had to deny your reality. You had to accept a false trust in that moment. You couldn't speak up. You had no voice. And you had to learn to reorient the truth and con yourself that this is okay. Bingo. That's where it is. Okay? Now, if that's not enough, here's more proof for you. If something bad happened in your life, like you were raped or bullied or broke up with a boyfriend or girlfriend, something traumatic, did you immediately tell your parents? Or are there aspects of your childhood you still have never told them? Yeah. Because what would happen if you told them? They couldn't accept you. There isn't a single person on this planet who can answer those two questions and say they were always able to do that. So let's use negative thinking. In other words, let's look at the negatives in our life to gain reality and truth so that we can stop conning ourselves and stop conning those around us and make a global change in the world. Like, let's get to real truth. Let's get to real positive thinking. This is the way out. So that, and the scientific proof of it, there was an ACE study. I've talked about this on several podcasts. The CDC and Kaiser Permanente in the late 90s, early 2000s did a groundbreaking study, 20,000 people, and it definitively proved every one of us has been through horrific experiences in childhood. Horrific. If you'd like, I'm not going to go, I've done podcasts where I go into the details of it. I'm not going to, but if you'd like, it's real simple. Just type in ACE study, ACE study on Google. You'll see the questions, you'll see the proof, and you'll go, oh my God, yeah. We've all been massively traumatized in childhood, and that's what causes all of this. What I want to focus on is because there's such an epidemic of people who think their childhood was perfect. I'm going to borrow from this book. And every single person, if you've ever been conned, you have to buy this book today, like immediately. It's called The Emotionally Abusive Relationship. It's by Beverly Engel. It's Engel. You must buy the book immediately because you need to start getting into reality of what abusive parenting is. Again, I'm not parent blaming here. I'm just getting into reality. I'm an abusive parent because I'm still learning how to do all this stuff. We've never been taught. I'm not a bad person. I'm trying to get better. And the only way I get better is to get into reality and own that I'm not always the best parent. And that's what I'm advocating. So your parents loved you. Every single choice they ever made, they made it to completely consume you with love. But no one's taught them how to do that in a non-abusive way. That's the problem. The way we've been taught to do it more often than not is massively abusive. And nobody knows. That's the reason I do this show. So I'm going to borrow from her book where she breaks down into 4 parenting styles. I'm going to ask questions, give you things to think about so you can start identifying the difficulties you went through in childhood so you can see what caused you to be susceptible to being conned. I've also added in my own experience, questions, and different things to further differentiate so you have more skills and tools to get into reality and start doing the work so you can stop being conned. All right. That's the goal of this. You have to get into reality of what you've been through, go become an expert in it, heal those wounds, and that's what will allow you to address, being conned all the time and the different things that you struggle with in life. So one of the parenting styles that she identifies is what she calls the abandoning, rejecting parent. I went through this. Were one or both of your parents or whoever raised you addicted to anything? Alcohol, drugs, pills, TV, food, work. Yeah, I know everyone thinks, see, it's so funny how we differentiate in society. Like if you have a porn addiction, you're a disgusting human being. Or if you have a cigarette addiction, you're disgusting. But it's perfectly fine to have a couple drinks, have a couple glasses of wine every night. That's alcoholism. It's hysterical to me. It's perfectly fine to be like, that's the other thing we've done. We've now condoned being overweight. We're massively obese because we're addicted to food, because we've suffered so much childhood trauma. But instead of dealing with that, now we make plus size and overweight okay. You're just stuffing your pain. Like the studies are overwhelming, and you can sugarcoat it any way you want and say you're not being inclusive. It's not true. Okay? We have to get into reality as a society. We have to exercise negative thinking. What I mean by that is reality, so that we can forge ahead positively. But making these excuses and allowing people not to deal with reality is not loving. It's not kind. Okay? Were you left at home for long periods of time? Did one or both of your parents work? Were you a latchkey kid? Were they just like mine? Like I did this to my kids. See, I did what my parents did. My parents used to kick us out from 7 a.m, come back at dinner. Well, I did that to my kids. I didn't know how abusive that was. I can still think of my youngest daughter. We went and bought a car while we left. We just told her to roam the neighborhood. Now, I didn't have a problem with her learning to be independent. What I have a problem with is, why couldn't I take her with me? Like, again, I just did what my parents did. I didn't know any better. You can only do what you know. So there's we've all done things like that. That's what I mean. We've all been through abuse. Did they fail to pick you up on time? Was that a problem? That's abuse. Was there a divorce or separation? That creates abandonment. All of a sudden you only have one parent. Did you not know your parents? Like I didn't know anything about my dad's child. Well, not anything. I knew very little details about my dad's childhood until my 30s. Until after my first divorce, because I went 10 years without seeing him. If you remember from my book, I wrote a letter to him asking to get to know him when I was in my early 20s, and he flipped out on me. It wasn't until my late 30s that I ever really learned about my dad and who he really was. Was a parent distant or aloof? Did they come home after work and go right into their study or bedroom or something like that? Were they above you, like my dad, asking him for homework, help with homework? He wouldn't do it. Were your parents unable to, for some reason, care for you as a child? Did you get raised in daycare? Did you have a nanny? I know, everyone condones it. I'm saying you have to get into reality that you're teaching your child I'm not saying don't work, but by choosing daycare, whether you're a man or a woman, I'm not pointing the finger at women. Men could stay home. But what you're choosing is your child to be raised by their peer group, not their parent. When you choose a nanny or daycare, that's abandonment. Were you adopted? Were you in the foster care system or raised by others besides your natural parents? Did either parent die as a child? If you went through any of those things, you went through what she calls abandoning, rejecting parenting. Okay? Pretty much all of us have been through many of those things. All right, the next thing she talks about is possessive parenting. Possessive parents dominate, control, and consume a child emotionally. They do this in many ways. Like my ex-wife did this to one of our daughters, like held her obsessively and close. Like we had the video camera. It's creepy. Like she has almost 24 hours a day video footage of our first daughter, virtually none of our second. Like that's suffocating to a child. The over attachment, the constant obsessive need as an infant or even as, preteen, teen, and often college. I saw this woman post on Facebook last year when she sent her daughter off to college. It was like pages and pages of her reciting the first week of her daughter's, her daughter's first week in school. She knew every single detail, like she couldn't let her child go. That is not healthy parenting, yet everyone thinks it is. Oh, I'm so involved in my child's life. Please don't be. Like that's horrific at that age, going off to college, and they're calling you every day and sharing every intimate detail of their whole history. That's to feed the mother. That's not for the child's sake. The mom was the one, promulgating all across social media. It was about mom's need for connection, not the child's. That's horrifically abusive. Were your parents overprotective and afraid of everything? I see this all the time. I write about it in my book. This woman on the train, the Denver airport, and her son wants to, the train kind of jerks. He wants to kind of just not hold on to anything. And she just panicked. No, grab the rail. Like the energy coming off of her. That's massively abusive. You need to let your child explore so they know how to explore. So they fall and bruise a knee and they learn, oh, if I don't hold on, like you have to give them space to make, minor mistakes. So they learn lessons and they learn to self-correct. Parents who are overprotective, they're doing it because they're so devout emotionally. They want to control the child so they don't have to deal with themselves. In the meantime, they're killing the child because then the child gets into adulthood, can't take care of themselves. Did your parents, would they not allow babysitters or family members to share in the care of your child? My ex wouldn't let anyone, like I couldn't go anywhere with our kids ever. That's massively abusive. Did your parents discourage you from exploring the world for fear of something bad will happen? Like in every idea that you bring up, do they go, oh my God, this could happen and this could happen and this could happen? That's a possessive parent. They're possessing you to try and calm themselves emotionally. Did they feel jealous of anything or anyone that you became interested in? Did they find faults with your friends or your interests? Were they constantly judging people? See, that could be, that could be a threat to them. And so they're trying to possess you. So they're going to condemn your friends, your boyfriends, or any interests you have. Do they become even more controlling and strict as a teenager? Did you have a rigid curfew? Did you have rigid restrictions around your friends? That happens a lot. I see that happen quite often. That's not to protect the child. That's to protect the parents' fears. Are they highly restrictive of the clothing that you wore? An overly sexualized father will do this because he's created whether he's conscious of it or subconscious, he's sexualized his daughter. And so he's going to be highly, possessive of what she wears under the guise of, well, I don't want my daughter to look like a tramp. I'm saying, I'm not saying send your daughter out in lingerie, but this is something to think about. How did that show up in your life? Were you ever used emotionally to meet the unmet needs of your parents? Did they make you a best friend? This happens a lot, especially now. Did they share too much information about your mother or father? My mom did that. She would share a lot about my dad's imperfections and how he didn't love her. That's horrifically abusive. This happens a lot in divorces. One or both parents start telling the truth about the other parent. That's possessiveness. That's about abusing the child to dump their emotional pain that they can't deal with. That happened to me in my marriage. She just puked every thought and feeling she ever had of me, created a blog. Like she made it her mission to destroy me to our kids. That happens quite often. And if you're in a divorce and doing that, please stop. You're destroying yourself and the kids. Let's move on to the next one, the domineering parent. Did they dictate how you speak, how you act, how you dress, who you associate with, under the guise of teaching or correcting you for your own good? It's a very manipulative. Bottom line, were you scared of this parent? I was scared to death of my dad, like frightened. I mean, it's pretty simple. If you were scared of a parent, you suffered severe abuse. I had a client in the office recently, came in, brought her one of her children in to see me because of anxiety. Well, the anxiety is her. She's so domineering, but she thinks she wants it to be, the friends he hangs out with and, all this other stuff. Well, no, she's possessive and domineering. She's literally trying to manipulate the child. She scares the hell out of her child, but she doesn't want it to be her. She don't want to deal with herself. You want to talk about why you get conned. This is how you get conned. All right. They believe that holding the child close protects them. Like, did you hear this growing up? That, we want this really tight, close family, but they're doing it to feed their own fear and their own repressed anger. Do they unequivocally believe that children should obey their parents at all costs? They should never be questioned. If a rule is broken, the child needs to be punished, and often physically. Like, no wonder you couldn't say no if you've been conned. Think of that. Like, do you see how all of this correlates into accepting a false truth, into altering, brushing over the con man's lies or con person's lies and accepting all of these false narratives? Like, how could you not? You got trained. They expect everyone to bow down to them and explode with anger or violence if their authority is questioned or anyone tries to act independently. There's several people I can think of in some of the greatness groups that I run. This was their experience, that, the one parent was a god and you better know it. Well, no wonder you got conned. Like, how could you not? Basically, think of the domineering parent as a Napoleon complex, somebody you were just scared of. And it doesn't have to be all the time, but at any time during your childhood, were you afraid of one or both of your parents? That's severe abuse. And no wonder you got conned. And so there's a lot of recovery work there. The next type of parent is the hypercritical. They find fault with almost everything you did. You can do 9 things right, and all they'll ever talk about is the one you did wrong. I tell a story in the book of a parent like this who had certain requirements for grades. And the rule was, as long as they didn't drop below this certain marker, everything was fine. Well, one of the kids came in and they had raised their GPA a little bit. The other one had dropped, but was nowhere near this marker. And she took it out on him. Well, I helped her see that, she grew up in a family where she was adopted by grandparents. Well, they never liked her. It was step grandparents. They were preachers. And they just ridiculed her mother and her for being, trash. And so she's hypercritical. She got taught at a young age that nothing's ever good enough. And so, a lot of the work we did was helping her let go of that old programming that she wasn't good enough. Okay. A hypercritical parent is hypervigilant about any mistake you make. They're always seeing it. They never miss it, and they focus on it. They may focus this attention, this criticism on just one child or all of them. Okay. This type of parent can't ever be pleased. This happens a lot. They may have hatred for men or women. So they may focus that hatred just on the males in the family or just on the females in the family or the one male or female. Because of their childhood of origin abuse, they may then say they had a very hypercritical mother, and so they'll take it out on the daughter, but not the son, or vice versa. All right. The hypercritical parent, they threaten, they name call, and this is so prevalent. Sarcasm. Everybody, I'm just shocked that people think sarcasm is funny, and people post it everywhere about how sarcastic it is. They are like a badge of honor, whether it's dating profiles or social media. As I've said many times before, sarcasm, the Latin root of it means to tear the flesh. It is veiled anger. It is somebody who has stuffed their pain and they are literally gutting you. They're using a knife and just taking little slashes at your skin. It is not humorous. It's not funny. It's horrific and absolutely horrific on a child. Please stop being sarcastic. And if you went through it, my heart breaks for you, because it's always done with a smile. Oh, come on, I'm just being sarcastic. Isn't that what everyone says? Oh, come on, I'm just being sarcastic. Yeah, that's the problem. You're being sarcastic. Please stop. But see, you don't know how to say no. That's why you got conned. Parents, the parent who is hypercritical, they continually threaten that you'll lose your love if you're not good enough. I've heard parents do this all the time. Oh, you're going to regret that when I die. Yeah, geez, I'm getting older. Don't you want to please me before I'm gone? Things like that. That's horrifically abusive. Some parents are just direct, verbally abusive, straight up. And that's just as damaging as physical abuse, because it leaves someone with the deep inner conflict of, I have no worth. And that's why they get conned. It creates a child who's very self-critical or a perfectionist. If you find yourself, if you're a perfectionist, if you can't accept a compliment, if you can't accept forgiveness, if you're highly self-critical, you had a very critical parent. The other thing is, it creates someone like now, or maybe this happened with your parents, they were completely unwilling to ever receive feedback or healthy criticism. Could never have a discussion. I saw that in my dad. People would challenge him and he'd just shut off. So I knew I couldn't. Well, no wonder I can get conned. It's easy. How could I criticize you? I've never learned how. I never learned it was safe. The next type of parenting is physical and emotional neglect. Were you deprived of affection as a child? My mom was too affectionate. It was covert sexual abuse. It was the opposite. She leered at me. While my dad, you could tell hugging him, there was no attunement. He felt incredibly awkward. So you just learn not to do it. Do you feel your emotional needs of being listened to or complimented were not met as a child? That would be a reason you'd get conned. Were you without adequate supervision, like I said earlier, left alone in a car, outside, or at home for long periods of time? Were your parents too busy with work or other things to teach you about life, help you, or able to ask them about homework, or them just inquiring about your homework? Were they too busy or too disinterested to talk or listen to you about your feelings? not just what you did, but your feelings. Emotionally abused. Were one or both of your parents addicted? Were you told not to cry or punished when you got angry? That's common. You hear that all the time. Don't cry. Be a good boy. Be a man. You see that all the time. These are what I'm describing now. Or if you went through that first, if you were able to answer yes to any of the first stuff, let me say it again. If you felt you were deprived of affection, your emotional needs weren't being listened to, you weren't complimented as a child, you were left without adequate supervision, your parents were too busy to teach you about life or listen to you, you were physically and or emotionally neglected. That's the abuse you went through. So what I'm getting through is I'm asking questions now for you to be able to identify how you were abused as a child. Again, this isn't to denigrate your parents. It's just to get into reality. So were one or both of your parents addicted to anything? Were you told not to cry or punished when you got angry? Was a parent critical or domineering? Was it difficult to please or one or both of your parents, or did you feel no matter what you did, your parents would never approve of you? Were either parents possessive of you, restricting your needs and activities? Did either of your parents treat you as a confidant or seek you out for emotional support? Did you feel like a parent to either one of your parents or even a sibling? Did you have to take care of your siblings like a parent? This means if you went through either of those, your parent treated you like a partner, not a child. So if you went through any of those that I just listed off, you suffered primarily emotional abuse as a child, okay? Those are all examples of emotional abuse, all right? Now, these are examples of emotional, sexual, and physical abuse, all right? If you went through any of these, that's what you suffered. Did either parent physically slap, spank, hit, or threaten you in any way physically? Did a parent or an adult sexually abuse you? Was a parent emotionally incestuous? Like my mom was that way. My mom would tell me how good looking I was. Like it felt creepy. All right. Did they look at you sexually? Did they ask inappropriate sexual questions? Did they walk around half dressed or naked? My mom did that a lot. Did they talk to you about the other parent? So, like I pointed out earlier, in effect, using you emotionally to support them through the, difficulties with their spouse. Was a sibling ever emotionally incestuous or sexually abusive? If you went through any of those, you were all three: emotionally, sexually, and physically abused. All right. Now, finally, if you ever ran away from home, and if you were ever so enraged at one or both of your parents or a sibling that you seriously wanted to kill them, those two, running away and wanting to kill someone in your family, those are signs of severe emotional, physical, and or sexually abusive homes. Well, most kids have run away and they just think, most people laugh it off. We need to get into reality of how much pain we're all in. That's why I'm doing this show. That's why you get conned. And unless you address these topics and heal these wounds, you will be conned again. And that's why American greed, all these well-to-do people, the most broken are generally the most wealthy, the most successful, because they've used that to cover up how much pain they're in. All right. So the thing to realize is all of these examples create a loss of an ability to connect with our own selves emotionally. All right. When we go through this abuse, we separate from ourselves. We therefore lose the ability to detect lies. After all, we had to accept lies. We had to accept mistreatment to survive our own childhood. All right. That's why we get conned. We had to create false narratives. We had to believe that it's not possible for me to say no. That's how I survived childhood. That I can't speak up for myself. I have no voice. That I have to trust implicitly. I have to shut off my feelings, which are my truth detector, my gut instinct. I have to shut that off because to survive, I have to implicitly trust my parents. And that leads us to the next thing. I have to then reorient the truth into a fantasy of what my parents wanted to survive this. Well, that's exactly what you're doing when you're being conned. You've completely detached from who you are. And the only way to get through any of this is to do the work. What are we talking about? We're talking about high levels of trauma, high levels of fear, a deep shame core, and denial. We're talking about the worst day cycle that I wrote about in my book. You ever want to stop being conned, you have to read the book and go through that process. The other thing we're talking about, again, you have to read this book, The Emotionally Abusive Relationship. You have to go become an expert in the perfect imperfections we all suffered through in childhood and be willing to do the work and be willing to break the cycle in your own parenting, in your own relationships. You cannot do it from watching movies, from reading the superficial information that's out there on the internet, and the relationship coaching that's out there. It doesn't go deep enough. You have to do this deeper work because you have to get in touch with this to know why you're picking these people, why you're getting conned. Why are you setting this dynamic up over and over and over? That takes deep awareness, deep work. Okay? So to recover from this, if you want to stop being conned, please start saying no. If you don't know how to do that, like I said, get my book. It'll teach you how. You can join a greatness group, whether online or in person, or you can work with me individually. I think I'm going to leave it there. That's a lot to chew on. That's overwhelming. And for any of you who fall into that 80%, who started the show or have listened to the show believing that their childhood was great, this is a tough show. And so I see one of the questions is, so what do we do? I hope I answered that question for you, Dana, here at the end. But yeah, this is overwhelming information. And this is why I started the greatness movement. People just don't know. And the books that are out there, they don't go here. They all stop short of the real truth. Even the programs. I went to most of the programs and they won't give you this deeper truth. You have to go here. It's the only way out. Okay? All right. I'm going to leave it there. Remember, whenever we judge people, judge, blame, criticize, hate, the only reason we do that is because we're seeing in them a part of ourselves we haven't reconciled. Actually, we're doing the exact same thing, either directly or indirectly, and we don't see it. We haven't done the recovery work, and we haven't been able to forgive ourselves. And that's why it's there. It's there to show us. So this is a great time to hear this with politics. When you scream at that TV, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're screaming at yourself. Go do the recovery work. It's wonderful. It's a wonder. I love this time of year because everyone gets a chance to learn about their brokenness. Now, on the flip side, there's a positive element to this as well. When you see greatness in somebody, the only reason you can see it is because you have that greatness in yourself. Now, almost every time I say that, I see people go blank. They don't believe it. They're like, yeah, you can see it. They're like, they can't attach to that greatness. They don't believe they have that skill set. And it's just not true. They just haven't been taught how to find it. Well, if you want to find it, if you want to live in it, then the Greatness Movement is for you. As I said, you can start with my book, Your Journey to Success. You can join a group. Happy to work with you one-on-one. But let's start changing these dynamics in the world. Let's bring greatness to everyone. Thanks for watching tonight, everybody. We will see you next week. Have a great week.
I can do anything. I can reach any goal today. I can do what I want. I can be what I want to be.
Coach on fire.